The book of Second Timothy is a unique book. It is Paul's last known writing. It's a personal correspondence between Paul and his young protege Timothy. It's an emotional book full of last-minute instructions for Timothy because Paul knew his time was coming to an end. He knew his life would soon be taken from him. Yet as I read this book, I do not see any sign of fear for that life. I don't see any sign of fear for the unknown or for his economic or current situation. I don't really see Paul expressing this emotion of fear. And I guess the question is, why? Why does not Paul have this fear? Why is he not expressing it? Why does he seem calm and composed? I think if you were to read the book of Second Timothy, you'd come away with a similar conclusion as to what I have. And that is that knowing Christ brought Paul comfort. Knowing Christ brought him comfort. There's a verse in chapter 1 I wish to share with you, and it simply says, the latter half of verse 12 reads, I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him for that day. Knowing Christ brought Paul comfort, and knowing Christ brings you and me comfort as well. Knowing Christ brings comfort. So what does that mean? Well, there's three things we want to talk about this morning real quick. And the first one is knowing Christ involves both knowledge and belief. The word there, knowing, for I know, that speaks to a relationship. That speaks to a common thing that they've understood. They've worked out relationship. They've had those conversations. A relationship is basically between two people, and it requires a two-way street. You can have close relationships, distance relationships, long-distance relationships, but each way requires a two-way street. In other words, there is talking back and forth. There's a give and there's a take. There's ways around these things. It's a relationship. That's what he means by knowing. He says, I know, I have a relationship with. And then secondly, he says, because I know whom I have believed. He talks about this fundamental word, believe. That's actually the verb form of the noun of faith. Faith and belief are kind of interchangeable. Verb being believe, noun being faith. And basically what he's saying is, this is a choice that I have made to believe. I know, he says, I have a relationship with the one whom I believe. What are we talking about when we say believe, though? Because it's a unique statement there that we need to kind of touch base on. You see, Paul's referring to Jesus himself, obviously. And when he says, I know whom I have believed, he's saying, I know the story, the whole story of Jesus. I know everything about him. That is to say, I know he foretold in the Old Testament. I know he came with Virgin Mary. I know he lived on earth. He did miraculous signs on earth. I know he suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and buried, and was raised again on the third day. And I know that he ascended into heaven and now sits at the right hand of God. That's what Paul is saying. He says, I understand and I know these things, and I choose to believe. I have that belief in me that all that happened. I know whom I have believed. He has a relationship with that person that he believes in. Knowing Christ involves both knowledge and belief. It's relationship and believing. Faith. Faith and relationship. They go hand in hand in knowing Christ. But we also find that knowing Christ makes us secure because he is both trustworthy and able to guard this relationship. It's a unique phrase right there that he says, and convinced that he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him. God keeps his promises. It's a fundamental reality as we look back on the Old Testament and everything that we see in there, all the way from Abraham being promised a son, all the way to David being told that his son would build a temple, all the way to the Old Testament prophets as they predicted some really oddball stuff involving the Messiah that actually came true. God keeps his promises. And that's something we can take to the bank, is that everything that God has ever said, everything that God has ever promised will come to pass. We can know Christ, and it brings us comfort because we are secure in that he is trustworthy. He keeps his promises. The other aspect of this is that he uses that phrase there, because I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to guard that I've committed unto him. Guard. It's a unique word to use right there, and it's one that I think is something that we should take note of. It means, quite frankly, that it's kind of like a prison guard, right? We've given him something, he's thrown it in a room, and he's locked the door. He's guarding that. He's standing there, and he's watching over it. What exactly is he guarding? Well, it sounds like from the text here, he goes, guard what I have entrusted to him for that day. That sounds like our eternal life. It sounds like our faith. Everything that we believe in, everything that we stand for, everything that we accomplish, we entrust to him unto that day. And the Bible makes it very clear that God keeps it. Now, on a side note here, this relationship, this protecting of this relationship that God is guarding, we're not the ones guarding it. We're not the ones keeping it. We're not the ones really doing much with it. Because you know what? If it were left to you and to me, we'd screw it up. We'd drop the ball somewhere. The fact is that this relationship is through God. We commit it to him. We give our relationship, our hope, our eternity, everything that we've got, we give to him to hold for us. That's a unique idea. I know whom I have believed, and I'm convinced that he is able to guard, hang on to, keep people out of what I have entrusted to him to that day. We know that Christ makes secure because he is trustworthy. He keeps his promises, and he is able to guard this relationship to the end. We know these things. But knowing Christ also brings us comfort because, quite frankly, it is a bank on eternity. Eternity. When people get close to death, they start to wonder. They start to question. They start to think. And they start saying, have I done enough? Have I looked at enough? Have I been good enough? Paul says right here that knowing Christ, having that relationship with him, believing in him, and having that trust that he's able to keep all that, it's enough. There is no need to worry about the afterlife. That's what he's saying. All doubt of the afterlife, all doubt of where you're going after you die is gone because you have trusted him. Knowing Christ brings you comfort because, quite frankly, all fear of death is now gone. Now, I say that. It's easy to say when I'm still young and not facing death in its teeth. It's easy to say when we don't really think about it. I suspect when you get a little older, it'll be a little different. People come to a little different position. But I think Paul makes it very clear that we don't have to worry about this. We don't have to worry about the fear of death because we have entrusted into Jesus Christ, who is able to keep that which we've got given to him to that day. We've given this relationship. We've given what we believe. We've given him our heart and our soul. And he's going to hang on to it until that day. It gives us something to look forward to on top of that. Because we know where we're going. We're going to be with him forever. Knowing Christ brings us comfort during these times. We know Christ involves both our knowledge and the belief, a relationship and an action of faith on our part. Knowing Christ makes us secure because we know he is both trustworthy and capable of guarding our relationship with him. And we know that knowing Christ is, quite frankly, a wise thing to do simply because it has to deal with our eternal state. We know these things. In our current times, I find that we are finding more and more people that are acting out of fear and worry over things they cannot control. Far too many people are just letting these emotions run their lives. They get upset. They get worried. They can't think straight. In the past week alone, we've seen a number of people protesting the economic shutdowns and the stay-at-home orders of various and etc. governments. At the same time, we see some other people upset about the governments that are opening up, the ones that are slowly opening the economy and easing back certain restrictions. Fear is driving both parties. The fear of the unknown, the fear of the change, the fear of the things that they cannot control. But for a Christian, knowing Christ brings us comfort in these times. We are going to have to be cautious in our actions no matter what our circumstances dictate. We're always going to have to do that. We always have to be cautious. We always have to think logically. We always have to, walk that line that says we're going to walk by faith and not by sight, yet at the same time we're going to walk accordingly without fear. Regardless of our surroundings, we walk, and we walk cautiously. But while being cautious, we are not paralyzed by fear. We are not the ones that are caught up in panic. Why? Because knowing Christ brings us comfort.